Dan, if my spies and my sources serve me correctly, you've been at the White House yourself this week. Just tell me what you've been doing. Something to do with new media. We're part of, I suppose, the traditional media, aren't we? ITV, BBC, and Channel 4 and the like here. And traditional media in the States, I don't know, NBC, PBS, CBS, ABC.
Mhm.
I'm trying to remember off the top of my head all of them from when I was out there. So you have been talking to those who are part of the new media realm near the White House, is that right?
Yeah, and this is sort of a realm that the current administration are really trying to encourage into the sort of media bubble in the White House. Whereas previously they have really had very limited access. Suddenly it's being opened up to all sorts of new podcasters, to people who've got online shows who are not necessarily part of, as you say, the sort of traditional media. I've been talking to Natalie Winters, who's a really interesting character. She's only 24 years old. She's part of Steve Bannon's War Room program. In fact, she sort of hosted it while he was in prison. I don't know if you remember, he ended up in prison. But he's out now, and she still takes part regularly. And she's sort of a pretty kind of controversial figure in a way, not only because of her very right-wing viewpoint and politics, but because she's so young. She's very disparaging about the legacy media, as she calls it. So we did a bit of a walk around the White House with her to get a sense of how she views this new media environment. So, Natalie, here we are in the grounds of the White House. This is where you do the majority of your work. I do some of my work as well. Just tell us what it's been like being here, for someone who's relatively new to reporting politics here.
It's only been a few months. Our audience is absolutely loving it, having a seat in the room, but we've sort of approached the role differently. Less so reporting on what the White House is doing. There's plenty of people who are doing that, but really reporting on how the media is trying to wage warfare and opposition against President Trump. So it's been nice to have a front row seat to all that.
Right, so just talk us through what we're seeing here. This is what people sometimes call Pebble Beach, is that right? What does that mean?
Yes, Pebble Beach. So these are all the more kind of legacy outlets that have their tents. If it were up to me, I'd put the new media people in the tents. Frankly, we have more viewership, so it probably seems fitting. But these are where they do the outdoor shots. But the new media people, we'll see up there, there's sort of a grassy patch where people can set up cameras, use their phones. We have a whole setup, but that always sort of changes day to day.
And over here, this is obviously the actual White House. We've got the West Wing of the White House over here. I don't know, we got some visitors. President Trump isn't here as we're speaking.
They've opened it up for tours.
Oh, have they? Right,
yes.
Today, because it's a Friday. What is the kind of attitude of the White House towards new media like you now? Has it changed a lot, do you think?
Look, I think they love us not because we're sycophants or shills for them, but because we reach the people who helped elect President Trump, who support his agenda, who believe in putting America first. And I'd also even push back this term of new media. First of all, it's so, I think, monolithic when you're describing so many different outlets, but also, too, the Biden regime, as we call it, they had their own rendition of new media, and that was the vast censorship of the American people that was happening covertly behind closed doors, the back channels between social media companies, the federal government, and a lot of these legacy media outlets who oftentimes refuse to report on those stories. So this is sort of a different take on new media, which is actually giving the American people what they want, outlets that they listen to, as opposed to just getting propaganda talking points from legacy media outlets that all they can do is oppose President Trump.
Okay, so I hear that. What would you say to people who say, well, look, can you honestly challenge President Trump? Part of the job of the media is to call them out and stuff. Are you able to do that?
We do it, and we do it all the time. I sort of call it the horseshoe theory of opposition. Obviously, the legacy media is going to be all over President Trump for all things immigration, saying that, oh, well, because of the 10 plus million people that Joe Biden imported, one person you maybe got a little bit wrong, and they're going to overwhelmingly focus on that. We've been calling them out for the H-1B visa, so that's the importing of foreign laborers. That's a debate that has been going on even since before he was sworn in, that my show has always been sort of ahead of the curve. We've been insisting that the numbers for mass deportations need to be a lot higher. We think that, frankly, they should privatize the mass deportations. We're against kinetic involvement, these forever wars, the warmongering in Iran. We're very anti that. This sort of, I think, factions that you see in the Trump administration, certain there's more, neocon type war hawks. We're very anti that. We're very opposed to that. even on some of the student protester issues, right? The framing of it as deporting people who are anti-Israel, that's a framing that we've been sort of critical of because we're for deporting students who are anti-America, and particularly those that are from the PRC. We see that as a very, very existential national security threat, and if it were up to them, we'd deport all 350,000 of them.
People's Republic of China.
Yes.
So I hear all that. What has been the reception from, as you call it, the legacy media, the big networks? Are they quite hostile to you?
Well, I think it's quite interesting that they're just starting to cover the new media now, right? Because we're not really all that new. War Room's been around for a while, and these are sort of trends in media that you've seen even really since before President Trump's second term. They're just now being forced to reckon with it, I think, in an effort to sort of reverse engineer, the left's crusade to find their own Joe Rogan. The difference is that it's not about the personalities, it's with the set of facts that we're dealing with, and we would argue that we've actually been right, whether it was Joe Biden's mental health, the origins of COVID, the COVID vaccine, in general, the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party. So they mock us, they ridicule us. I mean, they're respectful. I obviously respect the institution that is the press briefing room, but they're not overly welcoming. But in other words, we're the ones holding a mirror to their face, right? It's a perpendicular trend line in terms of viewership and impact. So of course they're not going to like us being here. They no longer have a chokehold or stranglehold on the information that the American people receive, or at least coming from this sort of very, I would say, prestigious backing of the White House. We have that now.
You touched on Joe Biden and his health.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the CNN anchor Jake Tapper's come out with this book suggesting there was effectively a cover-up by the Democrat Party. Is that something that you think is now getting more credence with the legacy media, as you put it?
Oh, that's an absolute joke and a scam, and unless Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson want to donate their book proceeds to either maybe cancer research or a newfound journalism school, I don't think anyone should buy that book. These people are clowns. The idea that it was just the Democratic Party apparatus that covered for Joe Biden, the media is an extension of that. I guess that's the new racket for the Democratic Party, where they cover up for someone, they cover up a story for years, and they profit off on the other side of it, writing books. But I think just a broader trend that we've sort of seen in American politics, if you want to really get granular on that topic, a lot of the reason why the American people voted for President Trump was this idea that they're tired of these unelected bureaucrats making decisions. And the fact that you could have had a president who mentally was so absent for so long, right, essentially no cognizance, I believe I've previously described him as essentially dead, and that you could have had an administration go on, create all the havoc it did, not just here but abroad, for 4 years, shows you that that presidential role really has become sort of ceremonial and performative, and that these unelected, whether they're admin officials, career servants, political servants, take your pick, that they're the ones who are making the decisions. And that is what the American people are really, really upset about, and that's why you see President Trump going after what's perhaps called the deep state. I think that's too nice or cutesy a term. This is the permanent political class, these unelected bureaucrats who have their own set of policy, and it shows that you could literally have a dead president for 4 years, and they will run cover for him. And now these people want to lecture me that I'm not good enough at my job. Okay, I never covered up for someone who's basically dead.
So this is the famous backdrop.
Yes.
And where do you get a seat here, or do you have to stand?
Well, just like the tents, if it were up to me, and I know they've been mulling it over, potentially replacing some of the legacy media seats with the new media members. Haven't seen any movement on that. If it were up to me, I'd probably kick a lot of these people out. But a lot of the new media people stand sort of in that corner or this corner. Sometimes there's some, should we say, some tussles, some toss-ups over people raising their hands and blocking people's faces, so it can get a little petty, but...
And how do they decide who to call on for a question?
So that's going to be up to the press secretary. She usually always hits sort of the front row, usually gets a few new media questions in. I think the legacy media always sort of has a certain narrative that they're pushing. Usually it's probably setting the discourse on immigration to caring about, illegal alien convicted criminals and drug traffickers, those types, and they're really concerned about the human rights of those people, but that's not what most American people care about, so you probably, the more to the extremities you get, you're probably going to get questions that are more in line with what actual Americans care about. So sometimes you'll hear her say, does anyone have any questions that aren't about, insert whatever the topic is that the legacy media is really salivating over that day.
You've sort of come, I suppose, to be an emblem of the sort of Gen Z, young, right-leaning generation that maybe are looking for an alternative voice. Do you think there is a trend where there are young people are drifting to the right in America?
Well, I think you saw it certainly with the last election from a voting perspective. I think it's maybe a shift or reorientation in priorities. And I think the idea of people wanting to be able to buy a house, not, be disadvantaged from jobs because of whether it's DEI or affirmative action, live in a country with a secure border and not have to worry about their safety. Those are issues that I think affect really all demographics, but I think they have become so bad, so uniquely horrible under Joe Biden, that they sort of were enough to galvanize people who previously hadn't really voted, right? I think there's the politics of mobilization and persuasion. I think the conservative value set has always sort of been more persuasive probably to young men, but really that mobilization aspect was what I think the Trump campaign really honed in on, sort of by leveraging, right, the alternative media, the podcasts, but really I think representing the stakes that you have to lose if Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or whatever other essentially dead person they'd want to run had won again.
And in here, tell us what's through these doors here.
Yeah, so you got the Oval Office through here, but a lot of, on this side, you have all the offices of the press shop. There's an interesting distinction. You have obviously the press team and the comms team. So the press people are those who are liaised. They're lucky enough to work with people like us, or unlucky. And then the comms are the people who maybe you've seen the memes, the videos, the sort of funny Studio Ghibli stuff. They're the ones who are coming up with those strategies, more kind of the speeches, communication strategies. And then you have obviously a lot of senior administration officials. The red Tesla that President Trump bought from Elon is parked just on that side.
Right.
But whenever you see a Marine standing outside, that's how you know the president is indeed in the office. He's usually still there by the time I wrap my hit.
That means he's here now then, if the
Yes.
Marine's there? Okay. And he is literally just over the other side of this.
Yeah, and
Oval
if you
Office is just over there.
spend probably a few days here, you'd be able to see probably a few cabinet secretaries come in and out, a lot of visitors, a lot of guests, and it's always funny. You can see the media running like crazy people to get a shot or to ask a question. And then obviously the gaggles when they come to the sticks, as we call it, just happens right there. But you never know with President Trump. Sometimes he just goes out to inspect a flagpole and you see the videos. They look like chaos of all the journalists running to just get a picture of him.
And finally, I mean, when you were trying to get into journalism, did you ever dream that you would find yourself here reporting in the White House?
No, I don't even think of myself as someone who tried to get into journalism. I just have always been a huge fan of Steve Bannon and the threat that the Chinese Communist Party poses. And since so much of the legacy media is bought off by these influence ops, I started reporting on what they wouldn't dare to, and that snowballed into this. So now here I am at 24. I guess I started at 23 here, but it's been very, very moving, and I'm very grateful to President Trump and Caroline Leavitt for letting us be here.
Are you the youngest correspondent here, would you say? One of the youngest?
One of the youngest.
Yeah.
I think there may be some people who are maybe a year or two younger than me. You never know nowadays. But yeah, the new media is very young, I would say. It's definitely all under 30.
And that, in your argument, would be good because it brings energy, new perspective, different ideas.
I would say I'm sort of ambivalent. I'm not an ageist, but I think it goes back to the kind of question of competency and trusting the experts, the elites. They've kind of gotten everything wrong, whether it's China, whether it's trade, whether it's the cultural issues, the declining birth rates, the media that's covering up for, the essentially dead Joe Biden. They obviously got their COVID response wrong. So the idea that you have to just listen to someone because they're older than you is not true, right? What is an expert? Because to me, I would define an expert colloquially as the people who get things wrong the most.
Thank you so much for your time. It's got lots of provocative comments.
Lots of fact checks.
Yeah. But that was great. Thank you very much.
Thank
nice
you.
to meet you. Take care.
So Dan, what did you make of her personally? I mean, I'm a bit staggered, to be honest, about how young she is.
She's young and she's incredibly opinionated, a bit like Steve Bannon. She can talk and talk. You have to really rein her in. Steve Bannon, I remember, gave me the longest soundbite I have ever got on camera at a Conservative conference, where he talked as we walked from one end of the conference to the other. I think it was about 10 minutes non-stop of Steve Bannon just sort of holding forth. and she's very much kind of out of that stable. She's interesting as well, not only because of her politics and her disdain for the mainstream media, as she would call it, but she's also got her own fashion brand called She's So Right. So she sells sort of bags and T-shirts and all kinds of things. So she's a real dynamic presence, whether you agree with her politics or not. She's certainly shaking things up in the White House. And of course, the Trump administration absolutely love her.
Laura, so the idea of this new media was very different from your time in the White House. How do you see the power of the likes of podcasters, YouTube like hosts and things like that? How do you see their role within the Trump administration, and how does it compare to when you were there?
Yeah, I mean, look, people consume media in many different ways today compared to when I was there with the Clinton administration. I was in the White House press office before I became the White House director of events and was responsible for pool movements in the White House press corps, traveling with the president. And the thing is, I absolutely think that it should be the ability, you need to reach people where they are. And it's not only the traditional legacy media networks and wire services and radio. But, when we think about the White House press corps, that press briefing room and the White House Correspondents Association was created to give accountability to the American people on the administration in office, whether that's Democrat or Republican, to ask the tough questions, to ask questions of which then readers and viewers and listeners can judge on how what they're doing inside the White House affects them, no matter where they live throughout the country or the world, for that matter. And so I think increasing access is a good idea. But when you start just bringing in pro-administration talking heads, what does that do? What does that serve the whole of the American people? It serves the right-wing media that listens to it, that wants in. When I was the White House director of events, I always made sure that if we had an event where we had a Democratic member of Congress on stage with the president to talk about what the president was discussing, we need a Republican. And you need, so if they want to open up to pro-right wing, they should open it up to pro-democratic.
The other kind of worrying trend in this White House, yes, it's refreshing perhaps that they're opening it up to some new media, but on the other hand, they're closing it down to very well respected agencies like the Associated Press, for example, got kicked out of the White House pool because they refused to use the term the Gulf of America. And you're seeing this sort of self-censorship as well. I noticed it during the Elon Musk appearance. Only one person attempted to ask about this story concerning his drug use, which
the New York Times investigation, and he shut it right down, didn't he?
Shut it right down, and no one followed up. Now, under previous administrations, the press would hunt as a pack a little bit, and you get multiple questions from different agencies trying to harry and get to the truth. But it feels like there's a degree of self-censorship now because journalists are worried, I think, that if they ask difficult questions, they're going to get less access to the White House, like the Associated Press.
And it's also really interesting, Dan, to hear from journalists that covered the Kremlin for years, who said that, Putin handpicks the reporters in his office on his trips, of which will only report what they need to be reported. And especially when the AP was kicked out, and then a judge said that was that was against their First Amendment rights. But they have taken more control over access to the president. And, when you control access through media, you're also controlling access to the American people. And the deal is this: when you're elected president, it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. When you walk into that Oval Office, you're no longer on a rally stage. You're not on a debate stage against a Democrat or Republican. You are there not just with those that voted for you, but you're there with the entire country and the world, for that matter, because you represent everyone when you walk into that office. And when you start taking away access to reporters that are holding the administration accountable and reporting on the facts, not just the perceived truths, I think that is really a denigration of the presidency itself.